My grandpa gifted me his $250 million company, but my stepdad seized control until grandpa made one bold move that changed everything. My name is Lauren, and the story I'm about to share began on the cusp of my 15th birthday, a time when the seemingly ordinary facade of my family life crumbled, revealing the complex and often painful truths that lay beneath. Outwardly, we were the picture of normalcy. My father, Frank, was a dedicated and hardworking man, holding a managerial position at a prominent company. My mother, Kelly, was a stay-at-home mom, her days filled with the routines and responsibilities of domestic life. And then there was Olivia, my adorable younger sister, a constant source of light and laughter, 7 years my junior. We lived in a comfortable home, enjoyed family dinners, and celebrated holidays with the usual mix of tradition and merriment. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension simmered, an unspoken discord that would soon erupt, forever altering the trajectory of our lives. The company my father managed was no ordinary enterprise. It was a testament to the entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen of my maternal grandmother. A woman of formidable ambition and unwavering determination, she had started her journey with a handful of laundromats, gradually expanding her business into a thriving enterprise specializing in laundry detergents and household cleaning products. Her success was a source of pride for our entire family, a tangible representation of her hard work and unwavering vision. When the time came for her to retire, she offered the company to my mother, envisioning a seamless transition of leadership. However, my mother, content in her role as a homemaker, declined the offer, paving the way for my father to assume the mantle of responsibility. It was a decision that, in retrospect, marked a turning point in our family's history. I vividly recall the day the carefully constructed facade of our family life began to crack. I was sequestered in my room, attempting to concentrate on my homework, when the muffled sounds of an argument downstairs pierced the quiet. My mother's voice, sharp and accusatory, rose above the din. "You're nothing but a loser, Frank," she shrieked. "This is my house, my family's business. You should be thankful I let you run it." The words hung in the air, heavy with resentment and disdain, a stark departure from the usual hushed tones of our home. The tension between my parents escalated in the weeks that followed. Conversations were strained, punctuated by awkward silences and thinly veiled hostility. Even Olivia, with her innocent and carefree spirit, sensed the shift in the atmosphere, her playful exuberance replaced by a quiet apprehension. I tried my best to shield her from the growing discord, engaging her in games and activities, desperately clinging to the remnants of our once harmonious family life. Then came the day that shattered our world. I returned home from school, my mind preoccupied with the usual teenage anxieties, to find my father standing in the living room, a suitcase by his feet. The sight sent a jolt of fear through me. "Dad," I asked tentatively, my voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" He walked towards me, his face etched with a mixture of sadness and resignation, and pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't stay here anymore. It's not good for anyone." I felt as though I couldn't breathe, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "But what about Olivia?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What about me?" He pulled back slightly, his eyes filled with tears. "I love you both so much," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Never forget that. But sometimes love just isn't enough." He kissed my forehead, a gesture of tenderness and farewell, then walked over to Olivia, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. He knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Be good for your big sister, okay? Pumpkin?" he whispered, and just like that, he was gone. The door closed behind him, leaving an echoing silence in its wake, a void that seemed to swallow the warmth and familiarity of our home. My mother arrived an hour later, her demeanor strangely unaffected by the seismic shift that had just occurred. When I informed her of my father's departure, she simply nodded, as if it were a foregone conclusion. "Good riddance?" she muttered under her breath, the words laced with a chilling indifference. I stared at her, incredulous. "Mom," I whispered, my voice filled with disbelief. How can you say that? She turned to me, her eyes cold and distant. Your father cheated on me, Lauren, she stated flatly. Over and over again. I couldn't take it anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, trying to make sense of the fractured pieces of my life, I overheard my mother talking on the phone in her room. Her voice was light and carefree, punctuated by bursts of laughter, a stark contrast to the strained and somber tones she had adopted in recent weeks. I wondered who she was talking to, but the exhaustion of the day weighed heavily on me, and I drifted off to sleep, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, my mother dropped another bombshell. One morning, as we sat at the breakfast table, she casually announced, I have some news. I'm getting married. I nearly choked on my cereal. What? I sputtered, my voice laced with disbelief. Mom, Dad's only been gone for 3 months. She waved her hand dismissively, as if my concern were a mere trifle. Sometimes true love happens unexpectedly, Lauren, she said, a smug smile playing on her lips. You'll understand when you're older. 2 weeks later, Paul, my mother's fiancé, moved in. He was tall and handsome, possessing a certain superficial charm that elicited polite nods of approval from acquaintances. He made a concerted effort to engage with Olivia, playing games with her, helping her with her homework, showering her with the attention she craved. But with me, his interactions were perfunctory, almost non-existent. It was as if I didn't exist, a ghost haunting the periphery of my own family. Meanwhile, significant changes were underway at the company. With my father's departure, my mother had assumed control, and she wasted no time in bringing Paul into the fold. They seemed to work well together, their conversations constantly revolving around business strategies and expansion plans. I tried my best to focus on my own life, school, friends, the usual trials and tribulations of adolescence, but it was difficult to ignore the unsettling feeling that I was becoming increasingly invisible in my own family. The situation worsened when my mother and Paul announced their intention to open a new branch of the company in another city. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, my mother casually informed me, We're moving. It's a great opportunity for the business. Then, as if it were an afterthought, she added, Paul and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you stay here. I stared at her, my mind reeling from the implications of her words. Stay here, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Without you. My mother quickly offered a series of justifications, her words tumbling over each other in a rush to explain away the unthinkable. The new house wouldn't have enough space, she claimed. I was almost finished with high school, and it wouldn't make sense to transfer schools right before my final exams. Her explanations felt hollow, a thinly veiled attempt to disguise the painful truth. I was being left behind. So, where am I supposed to live? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. On the street. Don't be dramatic, Lauren, my mother scolded, her tone impatient and dismissive. You'll stay with your grandmother. She's already agreed to it. I stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me, the force of the impact reverberating through the house. As I lay on my bed, tears of anger and betrayal streamed down my face. I couldn't shake the feeling of being discarded, a burden to be conveniently offloaded onto my grandmother. Asterisk, when did I become such an inconvenience to my own mother? Asterisk, I wondered, the question echoing in the silence of my room. The next few weeks passed in a blur of packing boxes and tearful goodbyes. Not my own tears, but Olivia's. She was heartbroken at the prospect of leaving her friends and the familiar comfort of our home. I helped her pack, forcing myself to maintain a cheerful facade, determined to shield her from the pain and confusion that gnawed at my own heart. Will you come visit us, Laura? She asked, her big brown eyes brimming with tears. I hugged her tightly, my own tears threatening to spill over. Of course I will, squirt, I replied, my voice choked with emotion. You can't get rid of me that easily. The day of their departure arrived, and I stood on the porch with my grandmother, watching as the moving van pulled away, carrying my mother, Paul, and my little sister to a new life, a life that no longer included me. My mother offered a cursory hug, Paul a perfunctory nod, and then they were gone, leaving me standing there, feeling utterly alone and abandoned. My 20th birthday arrived with an unsettling quiet. I awoke that morning with a strange sense of emptiness. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, a milestone marking my transition into adulthood. But all I felt was a profound sense of disconnect, a yearning for the family that was no longer whole. My mother called, of course, her voice overly cheerful, her words hollow and insincere. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she chirped. "I'm sorry we can't be there. Work is just crazy right now. We'll celebrate next month when we visit, okay?" I mumbled a non-committal response, knowing full well that her promise was empty. They hadn't visited once since they moved, their new life seemingly too full to accommodate even a brief visit with their eldest daughter. My grandmother, ever perceptive, must have sensed my disappointment. She went out of her way to make the day special, allowing me to invite a few close friends over, ordering my favorite takeout, and even baking a cake herself. For a few precious hours, I managed to forget the ache in my heart, the feeling of being forgotten and discarded. The following morning, however, reality came crashing back down. My grandmother called me into her office, her expression unusually serious. "Sit down, Lauren," she said, gesturing towards the chair opposite her desk. "We need to talk." My mind raced, conjuring up worst-case scenarios. Is she kicking me out? I wondered, my heart pounding in my chest. Where will I go? But then, to my utter astonishment, she smiled, reached into her desk drawer, and pulled out a small, unassuming folder. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of affection and pride. "Open it." I hesitantly opened the folder, my hands trembling slightly. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what was inside. The legal documents transferring ownership of her company to me. "Grandma?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is this?" She nodded, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "The company is yours now, Lauren," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I see potential in you. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I know you'll do right by the business." "But Mom and Paul," I protested, my mind still struggling to process the magnitude of her gift. "They're running it now." My grandmother's face hardened slightly. "They're running a branch," she clarified, her voice firm and unwavering. "The main company, the heart of it. All that's yours now." I sat there, stunned into silence, the weight of her words settling upon me like a heavy cloak. Me, barely 20 years old, the owner of a multi-million-dollar company. It felt surreal, like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. I don't know what to say. I finally managed, my voice choked with emotion. My grandmother reached across the desk and squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You don't have to say anything," she replied softly. "Just promise me you'll give it your all." I nodded, still reeling from the shock, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "I will," I whispered, my voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "I promise." She leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile gracing her lips. "Good," she said. "Now, I have one more piece of advice for you, and I want you to listen carefully." I leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "Call your father," she instructed, her voice firm and unwavering. "There's more to the story than you know. Talk to him, even if it's just as a consultant, but hear him out." Took me a full week to muster the courage to contact my father. We arranged to meet at a small, unassuming cafe downtown. As I sat there, waiting for him to arrive, my heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and trepidation churning within me. When I finally saw him, my heart ached. He looked older, wearier, the lines on his face etched deeper than I remembered. But his eyes, despite the fatigue that shadowed them, lit up when he saw me, a flicker of warmth and affection that momentarily dispelled the awkwardness of the situation. There was an initial silence, a hesitant dance of unspoken words, before the dam finally broke. I poured out my heart to him, recounting the tumultuous events of the past few years. The divorce, my mother's hasty remarriage, the move, the unexpected gift from my grandmother. He listened patiently, his face a canvas of shifting emotions. Sadness, regret, anger, and a deep, abiding love for his daughters. When I finished, he took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for a difficult confession. "Lauren," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "there's something you need to know about the divorce." He then proceeded to tell me his side of the story, a version of events that starkly contrasted with the narrative my mother had woven. He spoke of years of emotional abuse, of constant belittling and disrespect, of feeling perpetually inadequate in my mother's eyes. He described the night of the fateful fight that had precipitated his infidelity, a night fueled by alcohol and years of pent-up resentment. "I cheated on her," he admitted, his voice filled with shame and regret. "I regretted it right away, but your mother used it against me. She threatened to take everything, even you and Olivia. She wanted me to leave, to give her all the property, and to pay exorbitant alimony." I sat there, stunned into silence, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. This wasn't the mother I thought I knew. "Why didn't you fight it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and love. "Because of you and Olivia," he replied softly. "I didn't want you both to go through a messy public divorce. I thought this would be easier." As we continued to talk, a sense of relief washed over me, a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I had been carrying for so long. For the first time since my parents' separation, I felt a reconnection with my father, a sense of understanding and forgiveness that had long eluded me. Before we parted ways, I took a deep breath and asked, "Dad, how would you feel about helping me with the company as a consultant?" His smile, wide and genuine, was all the answer I needed. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I immersed myself in my studies, preparing for my final exams, the pressure of impending graduation weighing heavily on my mind. My father, true to his word, began working with me, offering his guidance and expertise as I navigated the complexities of the family business. And my grandmother, ever the watchful matriarch, provided unwavering support and encouragement, her belief in my abilities a constant source of strength and inspiration. My high school graduation arrived sooner than I expected. I stood on stage, clutching my diploma. A sense of accomplishment mingled with the bittersweet awareness that this chapter of my life was closing. My grandmother was in the audience, her face beaming with pride. My mother and Paul, however, were conspicuously absent. By then, I had learned not to expect their presence, their absence a painful but familiar reminder of the fractured state of our family. As summer approached, I turned my attention to college applications, my grandmother's guidance and my father's unwavering support propelling me forward. I aimed high, applying to prestigious universities, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose and the desire to make my grandmother proud. When the acceptance letters began arriving, I could hardly believe my eyes. But the biggest surprise came when I opened the financial aid package from my top-choice university, a full-ride scholarship. My grandmother cheered, pulling me into a tight embrace. "I knew you could do it, kiddo," she exclaimed, her voice filled with pride. "All those late nights and competitions paid off. I decided to major in business management, a choice that seemed both practical and fitting, given my newfound responsibilities as the owner of the family business. To celebrate my college acceptance, my grandmother decided to throw a small party, just the two of us. We ordered our favorite takeout, bought a bottle of sparkling cider. My grandmother, despite my newly acquired adult status, was adamant about upholding the no champagne rule, and settled in for an evening of quiet celebration. We were midway through our meal when the doorbell rang. My grandmother frowned, clearly not expecting any visitors. "I'll get it," I offered, putting down my fork. When I opened the door, my stomach lurched. Standing on the doorstep were my mother and Paul, their faces etched with a mixture of annoyance and impatience. Before I could even utter a greeting, they pushed past me and into the house. My mother wasted no time on pleasantries. "We need to talk about the company," she declared, her voice sharp and demanding. Asterisk now start. I stood there, stunned, as she launched into a tirade, her words directed at my grandmother, her gaze pointedly avoiding mine. She didn't acknowledge my presence, didn't inquire about my graduation or my college plans. It was as if I were invisible, an insignificant bystander in a drama that revolved entirely around her. "Why can't we access the main accounts?" she demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "And why are you blocking the transfer of funds to our branch?" My grandmother's expression hardened. "Because it's not your decision anymore, Kelly," she stated firmly. "The company belongs to Lauren now. She's the one who will decide its future and manage its finances." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. I watched my mother's face as she processed my grandmother's words, a flicker of shock followed by a surge of anger, and finally, a calculated shift in her demeanor. Suddenly, her entire attitude transformed, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Lauren, sweetheart," she said, her eyes wide with feigned affection. "I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us?" I blinked, taken aback by this sudden and dramatic change in her tone. She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. Instinctively, I recoiled. "We've settled so nicely in the new city," she continued, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We have a beautiful house, and there's a room just for you. We could set up a desk and get you a new computer for your studies and work." "No, Mom," I replied firmly, my voice unwavering. "I'm happy here. I have my friends, my school, and Grandma needs me." My mother's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Well, if that's the issue," she said smoothly, "we could always move back. Here, we could live in our old house just like before. Wouldn't that be nice?" I shook my head, my resolve firm. "It's not about the house, Mom," I said, my voice laced with a hint of sadness. "It's about everything." I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface, threatening to erupt once more. Before she could unleash another tirade, I decided to ask the question that had been haunting me for months. "Mom," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil within, "why did you really divorce Dad?" She froze, momentarily taken aback by my directness. "Well," she stammered, resorting to her well-rehearsed narrative. "Your father, he cheated on me, multiple times. I got tired of it. He left us for his mistress, and didn't even pay alimony." "That's not true," I countered, my voice calm but firm. "Dad told me everything. It only happened once, and it was because of how you treated him. He didn't abandon us. You kicked him out, and he has been paying alimony regularly." My mother's face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You ungrateful little brat. You have no right to interfere in my personal life. Everything here is mine, and I decide who lives where and how things are run." My grandmother, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, stronger than I had ever heard it before. "That's enough, Kelly," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You seem to have forgotten a few things. This house, the company, they belong to me, not you. I gave the company to Lauren because I trust her judgment more than yours. And right now, I think it's time for you to leave." I watched with a mixture of sadness and satisfaction as my grandmother firmly escorted my mother and Paul out of the house. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving an echoing silence in its wake. I felt a sense of loss, a grieving for the mother I had once known, but also a profound sense of relief, a release from the toxic dynamic that had held me captive for so long. "What now?" I asked, my voice muffled against my grandmother's shoulder. She pulled back slightly, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Now," she replied, her voice filled with warmth and reassurance, "we get back to celebrating your college acceptance, and tomorrow we start planning for your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you." The next morning, The tension from the previous day's confrontation still lingered in the air. I awoke to the sound of hushed voices downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs and peeked into the living room. To my surprise, my father was sitting on the couch, deep in conversation with my grandmother. I joined them, my heart filled with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. My grandmother explained the reason for my father's presence. "I've been thinking about Olivia," she began, her voice laced with concern. "Your mother, well, I'm not sure she's in the best position to care for her right now. I've suggested your father seek custody." A surge of hope coursed through me. "Really, Dad?" I asked, my voice filled with anticipation. "Are you going to do it?" He ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Yeah," he replied, his voice firm and resolute. "I am. It won't be easy, but Olivia deserves better than what she's getting right now." I couldn't contain my emotions any longer. I threw my arms around him, tears of gratitude streaming down my face. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. As we pulled apart, my grandmother cleared her throat. "There's more," she said, her voice serious. "I've hired a private investigator to look into your mother and Paul's affairs." The next few weeks settled into a strange new rhythm. I started my college classes, immersing myself in my studies with a newfound focus and determination. My father began visiting regularly, and we slowly but surely rebuilt our relationship, the years of estrangement gradually fading into the background. It felt good to have him back in my life, a constant source of support and encouragement. Then, about 2 weeks later, my grandmother called us both over, her expression grave. As we sat down, she revealed the findings of the private investigator's report. "It's worse than we thought," she said, her voice grim. She laid out the facts, each one hitting me like a physical blow. My mother had been cheating on my father for years, long before their divorce. Her affair with Paul had begun while she was still married to my father. The investigator had unearthed a mountain of evidence: hotel receipts, records of expensive gifts, and a trail of lies and deceit that painted a damning picture of my mother's infidelity. But that wasn't the worst part. "Paul is a con man," my grandmother stated flatly. "He's done this before. He charms wealthy women, convinces them to move their money, and then runs off with it." I felt sick to my stomach, the realization of Paul's true nature hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "So, when they wanted to move the company's money," I began, my voice trailing off. My grandmother nodded grimly. "Exactly," she confirmed. "He was planning to steal it and disappear." "Yes,